Hi everyone, welcome to the next episode of Cassandra's Box. This episode, so recently I decided that I needed to examine the axiomatic, which is to say, examine the sort of, thought-terminating cliches, the mantras, of these movements, and try to figure out what it is that they're actually saying, that they take to be truth, right? What is it that's behind that? And actually, my idea of examine the axiomatic came out of an idea that I had about a way to revise intersectionality, so that instead of it was never, Kimberly Crenshaw's tool of analysis essentially was never meant to divide people. It was never for that purpose. But it unfortunately has ended up resulting in divisions. So I thought of a way. It's unfortunate what went wrong, but I thought of a way to sort of revise that to avoid that pitfall of resulting in division and in dividing dividing people from each other. It ended up resulting in a kind of divide and conquer aspect, and that's not the original intention of its creator. So I've thought of a way to approach that might be better, but or might be less divisive. But again, it's very lightly sketched out. But in thinking about it, I thought it was important to examine the axiomatic. So here, today, I'm just going to do that with the axiom of TERFs or transphobes don't want us to exist. So I want to talk about what that means, what they're saying here. So first, let's start out a little bit about transgender history. And it's funny if you look at Wikipedia how much this page has been edited. It says, transgender history in the broadest sense includes examples of gender variance and gender nonconformity in cultures worldwide since ancient times. In the broadest sense, what they mean by that is that transgender was not invented until recently. So what they mean is gender nonconforming people. Oh, good, they said that in the second sentence. As this history is prior to the coining of the modern term transgender, opinions of how to categorize these people and identities can vary. This history also begins prior to the mid-20th century usage of gender in American psychology and associated conceptual apparatus, including the notions of gender identity and gender role. Gender was not used until the mid-20th century, and it originally comes from grammar. But then it goes on to tell us how Sumerian and Akkadian texts from 4,500 years ago document transgender or transvestite priests. Okay, no, they didn't. These are modern concepts. That's not what they're documenting. And again, at some point, I'm going to do a podcast about the colonialism of transgender ideology and how it appropriates everything. It just rushes in headlong and appropriates absolutely everything. It's appropriating oppression. It's appropriating terminology. It's appropriating people's civil rights fights. It's appropriating history. It's appropriating. It's colonializing and appropriating gender nonconformity in non-Western cultures. It's appropriating absolutely everything. So I'm definitely going to do an episode that's going to run down on every single appropriation, so that we can see the way that this is arrived out of nowhere. And again, I wish that people would be a little bit more skeptical. I wish that, your average person would be a little bit more skeptical. This has definitely made me very skeptical of the mainstream media. But I would have been skeptical anyway, not just of the claims, but just the fact this arrived out of nowhere and it's been pushed extremely quickly. And what I mean by out of nowhere is that transsexuals have been around for a long time, but the new transgender umbrella, which includes transvestites, genderqueer, questioning, and so on, all of that's really new. And again, part of that is a business decision to expand the category of transgender, because in order to get funding for the LGBTQ movement, especially since some really landmark legislation has already been passed. And it's maybe a little bit boring to keep fighting the good fight for lesbian and gays. It's easier to believe or to act as if we've actually solved homophobia, although we haven't even close to done that. Same way that we haven't even close to come close to solving the problem of misogyny and sexism. But we pretend that we have. It's easy to push through a piece of legislation. It's easier to push through a piece of legislation and feel like, wow, good job, we really did something there. Like getting gay marriage or women getting the right to vote. Than it is to sit back and say, how are we still extremely homophobic as a society? And how is it that we can begin to actually tackle this on the ground? And the same thing with sexism. How can we really... And homophobia comes from patriarchy. And if people don't understand why that is, again, an understanding of feminist history is important. Okay. And so, again, it actually kind of... this is a good analogy. I think it kind of strikes me of the way that the integrity of science is compromised. It's because there's such a push for results. And so the people who are funding science are people that don't understand that science is all about disproving, and that, many, if not most, scientific hypotheses are going to be incorrect, and it may take many, many years for any laboratory to show results. And therefore, you cannot rely on proving something as a means of getting funding. That's not doing good science. But because the people that are funding science are lay people, and they're people who generally want applications for that science. They're generally corporations run by lay people that are looking for applications, or their fellow academics who are not scientists. And, the whole bureaucracy of academia, they're pushing scientists for results in order to continue their funding. My brother complains about this quite a bit. It wastes a lot of their time and their energy and is completely pointless, and undermines good science. And actually, it ends up compromising the integrity of results because, even top science laboratories in the world will rush their results in an attempt to secure funding, thereby sometimes actually invalidating those results. So this kind of strikes me as the same thing. This is LGBTQ organizations rushing to get funding, and they're actually invalidating the reason for their existence, which is to protect the rights of homosexual and bisexual people, and to battle homophobia. And, by pinning the TQ to the LGB, rebranding this as about identity rather than sexual orientation, in order to secure funding, they're actually, in a way, they're compromising the integrity of their mission. So it really kind of reminds me of that. Okay, so there's a lot of, nonsense that's appropriation of other cultures, just like the appropriation of intersex, when you look at, when you try to look up transgender history. But the main thing that I wanted to talk about was the Christine Jorgensen. So the real beginning of transgender history, which is to say transsexualism, really begins with Christine Jorgensen in 1952, becoming the first person widely publicized as undergoing sex reassignment surgery. Christine Jorgensen, an American transgender woman, the first person to become widely known in the United States for having sex reassignment surgery. Grew up in the Bronx, New York City. Shortly after graduating from high school, he was drafted into the U.S. Army during World War II. After his military service, and it's funny how you still see her all the way through this, as though there were women that were being drafted into the U.S. Army during World War II. After that, he attended several schools and worked. During this time, he learned about sex reassignment surgery, traveled to Europe, and in Denmark, got special permission to undergo a series of operations. And as far as I remember, let's check it out, died as a result of attempting a womb transplant. let's see what it says about death. Let's see. No. Okay, who was it I was thinking of? It was not her. Although she was one of the earliest ones to, he was one of the earliest ones, a homosexual transsexual who later married a man, to receive what they're calling, euphemistically, vaginoplasty, which is actually penile inversion. So he was one of the first people to do so. Who was the first trans woman who tried to have a uterine transplant? Let's see. Oh, that's right. It was Lily Elbe. That's right. Even earlier, the Danish artist. Okay. Again, I kind of confuse them because of the fact that Christine Jorgensen, not only the last name, but the fact also that he went to Denmark in order to have this procedure done. Okay, so it was a Danish artist, Lily Elbe, who attempted that, and actually Lily Elbe was alive from 1882 to 1931, and died as a result of rejecting a uterine implant, which was, again, the doctor that implanted the uterus into him. Again, it's really, really hard to navigate pronouns with this stuff. The doctor that transplanted the uterus into him, honestly, in my opinion, should have been charged with murder, because that was never going to work, and it is never going to work, ever, unless we are actually, I don't know, honestly, I don't think, it's not going to work with any traditional surgical techniques. We would have to essentially grow an entirely new body for transgender people. I don't think that you can alter a body enough to allow it to accept a uterine transplant for males. Even if we could somehow change the male pelvis or find room in the male body to put in the uterus, and somehow even if we were going to be cesarean section, it would be impossible to do a vaginal birth, even if you had a pseudo vagina, because the vagina is muscular and relies on contractions to push the baby out, and that just wouldn't happen. So you could do a cesarean section, but that still wouldn't work, because there's all these hormonal signals in the endocrine system. So when a woman gets pregnant, all this stuff kicks in to support the life. None of that's in the male body. It's never, ever, ever going to work. So again, I think there's a lot of... It's interesting if you look at psychopathy and different careers. Actually, doctors are likely to be fairly low, of careers that psychopaths go into, except for the opposite comes to surgeons. Surgeons have a disproportionate number of psychopaths that are in that career, and it could actually even be a benefit, a pro in the career of being a surgeon, to not have your hands shake in this kind of scenario where the life and death of another person is literally in your hands. To be confident about that and to have no fear. That could actually, those are hallmarks of a sociopath, of a psychopath, and that could actually be helpful and come in handy. And then part of that sort of feeling of like a god, of having someone else's life and death in your hands, is part of, what's behind that kind of power trip. In my opinion, anyone who's involved in this kind of medical experimentation, when it goes wrong, as in this case, and as in many cases that are happening right now, because I'm not sure that people understand the extent, what these surgeries actually mean, particularly for women that are getting phalloplasties, or for kids that are going through this, such as, transgender girls like Jazz Jennings, who don't have enough tissue for the normal penile inversion, and therefore have to go through a very different procedure with pretty much guaranteed loss of sexual sensation, and a lot more potential complications. So in my opinion, anyone who gets sued by any of these patients should automatically go to prison, or they should have charges pressed against them and they should go to prison. Because not only are they failing to do no harm, but they are actively mutilating their patients. And they're involved in this medical experimentation. So, in my opinion, they should be held legally liable. And it's just incredible to me, considering how much money doctors pay in, malpractice insurance, that this is happening at all. Okay. So, the actual history of transsexualism is extremely modern. It goes back to the beginning of the 20th century, essentially. And so here there are people that are saying, it's not a coincidence. This is always, I think what they're trying to say by saying transgender people have been around historically, is they're trying to say that there's always been a place in societies for gender nonconforming people. And actually, I would say in the past that was, in some ways, it was healthier, at least, if societies that were like, oh, these gender nonconforming people should play this role in which they help the rest of us to understand the vagaries of gender or whatever. Not where you were just essentially casting off feminine men and shoving them into the non-men box, which happened frequently. Or not where you were designating one female the role of human being, or temporary human status, by identifying as male, because females are so oppressed that an all-female family would need to have some kind of gender ambassador, essentially. Need to have somebody performing the role of the male in order to connect that family to the outside world. That, to me, there's nothing progressive about that whatsoever. And there have also been cultures that have given kind of special roles as well to these people, rather than just, discriminating against them in various ways. None of this is any kind of... all this is evidence of is that patriarchy and homophobia have always been around. And that we've always othered people that are that don't conform to the gender roles that are dictated by whatever the society is at the moment. And all that means is that there have always been people that don't conform to gender roles. And so the idea that gender is a construct that some people are less able to go along with than others, and the flip side of looking at that is that some people are more able to resist than others. It's just evidence of that, right? It's not really evidence that there's always been trans people. So let's take a look at this whole transgender thing, and we don't want you to exist. What is it that gender abolitionist radical feminists actually want? I think that what we want, first of all, most of us would be absolutely fine with the whole trans thing, if it was not for actually pretending that sex doesn't exist. And so again, this seems like a projection. We don't want trans people to exist. It's a projection of what they're doing, which is that they don't actually want sex to exist. And if sex exists, they're actually kind of erasing the idea of cis or trans people then, aren't they? They essentially don't want people that don't... It's not that they don't want people that don't have dysphoria not to exist. It's more like they don't want there to be a material reality that their dysphoria is based on. They don't want sex to be a thing. So they are, in that sense, trying to erase... And it's funny that how this is all directed toward women. We don't have a lot of publications that are forcing people to write extremely dehumanizing language they would never say out loud, such as ejaculators or penis or prostate havers. That's really not happening. It's all menstruators and vulva owners and this kind of thing. So it's all very directed toward women, which again shows how this is all coming from males, really, specifically from autogynephiles. It's all really, it's all really aimed at women, and the idea that, and again, women are the soft targets here. So it's not surprising that they're picking on women, and they're picking on gay people because, They're the soft targets. Men and straight people are the hard ones. So that's a projection going on because they're the ones that are engaged in erasure. So what they're saying is that you are negating our existence in some way by not admitting that we are what we say we are, by not agreeing with us. They're saying that you are in some way negating our very existence, which again shows how fragile this whole thing is. They need other people to believe in them in order to even exist. And they're kind of aware of that. And that's where that you don't want us to exist is coming from. And meanwhile, there's like this incredible concerted effort to erase the meaning of sex in language, in law, in life, which is a huge undertaking because you're trying to bury and deny biological reality. And you're doing that in the service of a faith that because it's so easily invalidated is why you would need to do that. And so again, this is a very defensive reversal here. You're trying to make us not exist. In reality, it's the opposite. They're trying to force their existence on people, and they're trying to erase biological reality in order to do so, including compromising feminism, because sex is the axis by which women's oppression is wrought, and they don't care about the casualty of feminism. And they don't care about the casualty of the LGB. They don't care, is the truth. So here they are saying, you don't want us to exist. So let me examine what they mean by that. I think that most of us feel like people should be allowed to behave however they want. Most of us are gender abolitionist, and we don't even think it's not even about queering gender roles. It's about we think that there should be no gender roles. That's a big project. It's a big undertaking, but that's the basic gist of it. And so anyone can dress or act like it however they want, and it would change nothing about sex. And we do believe in sex, and we believe it's that we have to take into account women's biology and menstruation and pregnancy and birth in order to be able to actually accommodate women within society. So that women can also work and contribute in other ways, while also, having their female biology, which is more restricting because of that. So that's equity feminism, sometimes also called difference feminism, but taking into account the biological, physiological reality of the differences between male and female, and the fact that we are a sexually dimorphic species. So yes, I think that what most of us would want is for gender non-conforming people to be accepted and to accept themselves, and to not feel any and if we were living in a society like that, I think that there are some, I've come across and had debates with other feminists about whether or not trans people would still exist in such a society. I do think that there are people that might just have such strong dysphoria, or I should say body dysmorphia, that they may feel the desire to medically transition. A vanishingly small number of people, but still there. They wouldn't actually vanish, and I don't want to participate in anyone's erasure because I don't want to be accused of actually trying to make anyone not exist. So in such a society in which we did not have outdated gender roles that were dictating all of our behavior, there may be a vanishingly small number of people that still might like to medically transition. And the truth is, in such a society, they would pose no problem whatsoever. And so it would not cost us anything to be kind. That's the point. Such a society that was actually able to get rid of these kind of gender roles, these tired old stereotypes, and actually able to tackle violence against women, which I assume would go along with that project, we might not have the need to have either single-sex spaces, and there'd be so few people with such strong dysphoria. It would eliminate the vast majority. If we didn't have gender roles, it would eliminate the vast majority of people that are now under the transgender umbrella. there'd be no transgender, really. There'd be a very small number of transsexual people, perhaps. Perhaps. And it would not be a big deal to accommodate them. If in such a world. So to talk a little bit about... yes, we don't... I mean, the thing is that what we see is that these are people reacting to the pathology of society. That is the point. And what we want is for no one... so there seems to be this, this idea that transgender people have always existed, but this is the first time that we're actually able to help them with medical science. If that were the case, you'd think you'd see this in history anywhere, about the large numbers of people killing themselves, or any numbers of people killing themselves. And Fourth Wave Now has, reported on this in history, because they were so certain that they were the opposite sex and could not transition, or were not accepted. And that's not the case. That's not the case. There's just always been people that were gender non-conforming, that were reacted to in different ways by societies. Usually, rarely in some societies just with acceptance, and we don't hear about those societies, such as the Iroquois, for example, who were baffled by the Two Spirits and other Native American tribes they traded with, because they were such an egalitarian tribe that they had no need for some idea of the Two Spirits, which is to say a male person acting more feminine, a gay man acting more feminine, did not need to be relegated to the women's camp. And there was no women's camp that was saying women could not do certain things because of the lack of gender roles, because they were more egalitarian. So they were kind of baffled by this, right? So it's not like we're hearing about egalitarian societies and their lack of gender non-conforming people because of their lack of gender roles, right? And to us, that is the real, utopian vision toward which we should be striving, which is we would not have either prescribed or proscribed roles for people based on their sex. And then the majority of this would vanish. And so what we see is that there are people that are reacting to the sexism of society and to the boxes into which they're put. That's part of it. But part of it is also that there's been this flowering of the AGP, this thing that's been thrust out of the closet, and again, male people don't have to feel ashamed about their sexuality that's not hurting others. At the same time, if it's something that's totally dictating everything in their life, it may be a problem. And in this case, encouraging these people to think that they're actually women is actually hurting others. Absolutely. It's hurting women with regard to our rights. And I would also argue that it's hurting men that have autogynephilia as well, by encouraging them to think that they're actually women and to pursue this as a life choice. So that's actually something really, really sad, because so many people are giving, there's so much of this is about virtue signaling in order to gain social capital within your group. There's so much virtue signaling, so much lip service going on. But in the end, what you have is a person who's ruined their body, and it's much harder for them than ever before to get dates. It's not like people are putting their mouth where their money is. Yeah. So, I know that sounded really bad. It was a really bad joke, but what can I say? In any case, so what's going on here is that you have these people that are being encouraged into something that's going to really harm them and harm society. What we would like is for gender non-conforming people to be able to be themselves without feeling like they need to carve up their bodies and medicalize themselves for life. And as a person who has, I have multiple, I have both physical disabilities, I have some autoimmune disorders, And I also have some, mental health issues, and both the physical and some of the mental health issues have been caused by violence against me by men. So about by the larger issue of violence against women in society, and I hate the fact that I'm medicalized for life. They're and there might be some people who have something like Munchausen's, who like being medicalized for life and getting attention that way. And maybe this is a way that they can not be dismissed as being hypochondriacs, like women usually are. And they can actually be have attention paid to them. But for the vast majority of people, including for hypochondriacs or people who want to be medicalized, you're enabling a mental illness that's, in the long run, disabling. It's horrible to have to take blood tests. It's horrible to have to take medication to test levels. It's terrible the way that this, it's not something that's. I don't like having a condition that I'm going to have to monitor, that I have to really think about my schedule, my behavior, and what is it, how I'm going to stay kind of on track here. I have to be, in some ways more responsible than other people, and when it doesn't come naturally to me, it's not great. And people, why would you want to medicalize yourself for life, whether it's by enabling and encouraging and worsening your own mental health issues, or whether it's chronic pain and constant blood tests and shots and injections, and then all of the horrible health problems. Most trans men have severely shortened life expectancy. Do they talk about that? I mean, as compared to women that usually have fairly long life expectancy compared to men, trans men have life expectancy more like in the 60s instead of 70s or 80s, like women who aren't shooting up with testosterone. Not to mention the early menopause, brittle bones, mental health issues that come with unnecessary hysterectomies, and then the testosterone increased risk of heart attack and stroke and certain cancers, and there's also an increase for male to female in certain cancers from taking estrogen. And suppressing testosterone, and puberty blockers. God, the horrors of puberty blockers. These are people that are signing, and the horrors of some of these surgeries, some of the male to female surgeries, and even more some of the kind of phalloplasty techniques for the female to male surgeries are just horrific. It's just genital mutilation. That is just, it's abhorrent and it's indefensible, in my opinion. And it's medical experimentation. They're trying to push the boundaries of what it means to be human instead of to accept our bodies. Again, it's a kind of God complex type of thing that's happening here. The whole transhumanism is all about a God complex. And this is just paving the way to that. Instead of encouraging people to accept their human bodies and their sex bodies. So what is it that feminists want? We don't. If you are being medicalized for life, that is not. I would not consider that to be a healthy choice. I think that's pretty self-evident. We want people to be able to make healthy choices, of course. And we want gender non-conforming people to not be pathologized and othered, and to not feel the need to make up an entire identity in order to be gender non-conforming. And we want people in society, and the thing is that only further reinforces gender stereotypes. We want people in society to understand that gender stereotypes are harmful and regressive. So in the sense that we want trans people to be able to be happy in their sexed bodies, and we want trans people to get mental health help if they're suffering from any of the numerous disorders, whether it's borderline personality disorder or a narcissistic personality disorder or autism or major depression or anxiety or any of the other disorders that are contributing to this craze and to this belief system and to this ideology. We want these people to be treated, and we want them to treat those symptoms of, at the very least, to have therapy for other comorbid mental illnesses so that they're in their right minds to even make such a decision, first of all, and also obviously to be adults to make such a decision. And we want, them to feel comfortable being gender nonconforming. So we would like to get rid of the prescriptive and proscriptive nature of gender roles in society that are driving this. And we want to get rid of the violence against women and the objectification of women that is driving girls to want to identify out and boys to want to identify in because of this sexual obsession and fixation that we have going on right now in our culture. We want to address all of these problems, and what it will end up meaning is that transgender people will not be known as transgender people. They will be at first, they will just be gender nonconforming people that we can hopefully accept as a society. And then over time, as we actually are able to dismantle the whole concept of gender and the hierarchy, essentially, in my opinion, and I think in the opinions of many people, and from the research studies of many people and all the evidence that's been gathered, gender roles arose as a way to explain some differences in men and women. That some of them arose from sex differences, some of them were behavioral differences, and gender roles at first perhaps were supposed to explain those, but also they were the gender hierarchy and the assigning of arbitrary roles. Essentially, gender became a way of oppressing women in patriarchal societies. And it's not surprising that we have all these patriarchal societies because males across the board in all these different species are known for being more violent. That is why, actually, it's a big reason why we castrate males in other species. So they'll be more pliant, more, they'll be calmer, less aggressive. So it's not surprising that the aggressive sex has lorded it over women this entire time, and that's where patriarchy comes from. And to naturalize that dominance and to naturalize and actually further drive a wedge between men and women and further emphasize that difference, gender roles were created, and so it created the gender hierarchy. There's never been anything good about that, and I think a lot of trans people don't actually understand queer theory and what it was purporting to solve. And how it was purporting to go about that. I think that there's just a lot of lack of understanding in general about all of this is coming from. So do we want transgender people not to exist? Yes, we do want them to not exist. We want them to be gender non-conforming people. And then eventually we would like to get rid of the idea of gender at all. Yes. And just be able to live in material reality without saying that it these differences between men and women dictate the circumstances of our lives and our personalities. That's what we're trying to say. And then when it comes to people that actually have, the small number of people that actually have extreme dysphoria that does not resolve, like over 80% of people with childhood dysphoria does, those people who cannot find any other avenue and wish to alter themselves in order to resemble the other sex, to relieve body dysmorphia. If there's, in a genderless world, if there were still transsexuals, I don't think it would be a problem, because I'm assuming we would have gotten rid of all the safeguarding issues here, and all the issues in which women are underrepresented in patriarchy as well. So this would not be something that would be, stealing from women their safety and opportunity, essentially. in order to validate another. And validation is not something that any of us have as a human right. I may want to be seen as a supermodel, but I don't, I cannot dictate through law that everyone must pretend to think that I am one. Validation is not something that any of us deserve as a human right. For any of our feelings about ourselves. That's not, it's not part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And you cannot force other people to see you in a certain way. It's very important to be able to be realistic about who you are, and to not force your delusions on another. It is not a human right. Now, in the scenario that we were in a post-gender world, and there were still transsexual remaining, who wanted to, who could not, come to terms with the mismatch, and that they felt, and who wished to transition, medically transition to look like the opposite sex. It might be perfectly okay for people to go along with that in a world in which we had truly, in a post-patriarchal world. People might say, yeah, let's just be kind and we can change our pronouns for this person and allow them access to spaces and so on and so forth. If there were really no male violence and women in no way needed protection. There seems to be some idea that women have their own sports teams, or their own scholarships or shortlists or prizes, or their own restrooms and facilities, prison wings and shelters and so on, because of some kind of, I've seen this called apartheid and segregation, and I really want to slap those people. Yeah, if I could reach out through the internet, I probably would. They don't seem to understand that the reason women have all these things is because we are discriminated against still, and historically have been discriminated against. There didn't used to be any women's restrooms until toward the end of the 19th century. Women were attached to the urinary leash and could not participate in public life, unless they were willing to go around pissing in the streets and take their chances. And women did not have sports teams, and women's bodies are very different than men's bodies. We need to have our own fair play and even playing field. Women did not have scholarships. Women were not given opportunities. Women were not given political opportunities. This is why we have these put aside for women, because this is still a problem. It's still a problem, as we can see, that sex is not even a protected characteristic in law. When we're looking at hate crime law, or all these laws about protected characteristics and what constitutes hate speech, sex is never mentioned. Women have really never been protected as a group as such. We're not allowed to, refer to clear femicides, and there's so many of them that are clear femicides. We're not allowed to refer to them as hate crimes. So women have never really continue to not be protected. And as a result, these extremely hard-won rights that feminists fought for, first and second wave feminists fought for, those that do actually real work, we cannot compromise on these, because we're not anywhere even close to dealing with or dismantling patriarchy. Not even close. This is not something that we can compromise on right now. And who knows, in this theoretical post-gender future, it might be fine. I really don't know. There might be a very small number of transsexuals, and it might be fine to call them by the pronouns they want, and for everyone to pretend. But still, the thing is, to me, people should not be required to pretend for anyone else something that they don't believe is true. And it's not doing a kindness to the people that are not realistic. I could say delusional. And it's extremely unfair to force it on the rest of society. And so I'm still a little bit uncomfortable about that idea. Perhaps it would be okay to say those who wanted to use, the pronouns that the person prefers, and those that don't. Both would be fine. Who knows? But in the future, I'm assuming in a post-patriarchal world, there would be way less of the conflict that there is now, because there wouldn't be a safeguarding risk, and there wouldn't be opportunity, the lack of opportunity to which female people are accustomed, unfortunately, now. So it might not be an issue at that point. And again, it would be a very small number of people, because the vast majority of people right now that are identifying as transgender are uncomfortable only because of patriarchy. And that is the point. It's not that we don't want transgender people to exist. We don't want patriarchy to exist. We don't want gender, which is being used as an ideological cudgel with which to bludgeon women. We don't want and gay people and gender nonconforming people. We don't want that to exist. It's being used to constrain men's lives. It's the reason that men are not allowed to be feminine and also still be straight, or not allowed to even be, to prefer the company of women and still be straight. Men are so strictly policed in their man box, and we're doing this whole thing where all of the non-men, all of the feminine men are being called non-men and lumped into this group with women because men are the default human being. And we are tired of having to assert the fact that we are also human beings and that we are not simply non-men. We're really tired of having to assert that fact. It gets old. It really gets old. Yes, do we not want transgender people to exist? We don't want patriarchy to exist. After patriarchy doesn't exist anymore, will there be transgender people? Very likely not. No. There will be a lot of things would change if there were no more patriarchy. So it's not just transgender people that wouldn't exist. A lot of roles, jobs, positions, and so on would not exist. So it's patriarchy that we don't want to have exist. And would that mean that there would be low to no transsexuals? Yes, probably. And would that be a good thing? Yes, because these people are really unhappy. So yeah, it would. We would much prefer that everybody would be able to be happy in their bodies as they are, without experiencing dysmorphia or dysphoria and feeling like they have to transition. Yes, we would prefer that. So I just, want to talk about don't want trans people to exist. It's not directed towards trans people, and it's a very disingenuous argument. It's kind of like how just the term TERF is so disingenuous. Radical feminism predates this ideology, okay? Radical feminism has been around since before the push for transgender rights. It's always been male exclusive in the sense that it's about organizing for female people, but that's not what it's about. It's not about excluding males. It's not about hurting males, but helping females. It's a single issue movement that's about helping females. And it's a philosophy that examines the way that females have been disadvantaged in society. That's what it's about. And it's really extremely male-centric thinking to think of it as being about excluding men. It's not what it's about. It's just about helping women. And it does not focus on issues relating to males. And that is it. And so it is so self-centered to call women TERFs for following a belief system that they had before they ever even heard of you, and that it is consistent with radical feminism. And what's going on right now is that we're, according to class-based analysis, we're noticing that there's a very vulnerable group of young female people. We're noticing that there's a very vulnerable group of young female people who are being groomed and taken advantage of and used to provide cover for males, and groomed to be a kind of captive victim population for males, and whose health and livelihood and life and livelihood are all being compromised in the name of this religion, and we are very alarmed about that. So as radical feminists, when we notice this happening to girls, particularly we're noticing this happening to gender non-conforming girls, the girls that are most affected by sexism and the patriarchy, then that it is our duty to speak up. And when we notice that women's rights are being absolutely steamrolled in the name of this religion, and that women are once again being erased and forgotten, of course we have to speak up. This is not out of any sort of bigotry. This is in line with our pre-existing belief system, which is a philosophy that examines class analysis and the ways in which female people as a class are systematically disadvantaged, discriminated against, and oppressed. It is not just about excluding male people, much less about excluding this this neologism called trans. That's not what it's about. So do we want trans people to not exist? That's not the thing that we want. No, it's not. That's not the entire, rhyme and reason of our, or, raison d'etre or whatever, of our existence as radical feminists. No. Do we think it would be better if people that feel severe dysmorphia and dysphoria in their bodies did not feel those things? Yes. Do we think it would be better if gender were not causing such extremes of pathology? Yes. So we are gender abolitionists because we see that gender is used in a hierarchy to reinforce a hierarchy. And this is why trans ideology is not the slightest bit transgressive. If you're just switching teams based on the stereotypes, you're just reinforcing those stereotypes. Or if you're just saying, oh, I don't identify with any of those, but, we know that they're real for the rest of you. No, they're not real for anyone. We are all non-binary. No one is a walking stereotype. It's all ridiculous. It's a ridiculous reimagining and a total lack of historical understanding of things that even happened a few decades ago, such as in the 80s when I was a baby and a young child, and there were young adults who were breaking all these gender norms and not calling themselves a different sex than they were. This is a real backlash that is happening here. That has to do with the backlash of beauty culture and the backlash of male sexual entitlement, the men's sexual rights movement, the manosphere, and pornography, and the increasing the virulence of rape culture, and objectification culture. That's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing happening here. It's a response. It's a very disordered and pathological response to that. This is not any kind of civil rights movement. And what to do about, if these things do come to a head, what to do about the people that are living as trans and have gone through all these transitions? Well, we're going to have to deal with that, and those people are going to have to deal with that, and it's really fucking sad. And we agree that it's really fucking sad, and we think these people should be allowed to sue the people who butchered them if they feel like they want to do that. Yes, they should be allowed to, and those people should be in jail, in my opinion. Yes, absolutely, and we're going to need to have all kinds of psychiatric services set up to deal with people for the fallout of this, because essentially this kind of sunk cost fallacy has been manufactured. When you get people to go this far, it's hard to make them turn back because it's absolutely shattering. It would be absolutely shattering. And again, that's why the investment in the idea of the transgender child, and that's why they're willing to use an entire generation of gender non-conforming kids, many of whom would have grown up to be gay, and experiment on them, all in the name of legitimizing this movement. For these wealthy autogynephilic men. That's essentially, those are the people that are funding this movement. Those are the people that are so invested in making sure that we all believe that this is reality and in shoring up and propping up their ideology. They are peddling this shit to kids for a reason. And they are telling everyone else who got on board with this movement, all of those people out there who are dysphoric about gender and who are mentally ill because of this incredibly sexist, misogynist rape culture and objectification culture that we live in, and people who really have been affected by this because they are predisposed to mental illness. All of these people are being weaponized, and they're all being used to sell this shit to children for precisely this reason. There's a need to create the transgender child in order to prop this up and make it seem as if that this is, to naturalize this, to justify this. And what do we want? Do we want trans people to not exist? We want people who cut up their bodies to feel like themselves not to exist. Yes, We don't want that to be, it's not particularly against trans people. We want patriarchy to not exist, and if patriarchy did not exist, this would not be happening, and that is the point. And that's all I have to say about we don't want trans people to exist. Until next time.